components. So the default CLI TypeScript project comes with two components, welcome and about. And we're going to just use the welcome component and add a viewport to it. The viewport represents the custom element where the router will then render the component we choose to load. Just styling it a bit. Next up, let's create some components. Let's start with two HTML only components, or three actually. Let's start with the first one, call it 1.html and add the content tab content 1. And then we're adding 2 and 3 as well. So we got 3 components. Here you go. After we've created the components, let's try and load them into the viewport. Let's start with 1. Add a nav around it so that we can style it. And we're loading 3 components, 1, 2, and 3. Now, in order to use this, to actually load the components into the viewport, we need to let the framework know where to find these components. And once we've imported them from their HTML files, we can just load them up. Throw in some styling to make them more tab-like. And things are working the way they should. Except for if we leave this page and go to the About page and come back, the content in the viewport is gone. We can fix that by adding a default component to load, in this case, component 1. Now, if we go leave the component and come back into the welcome component, we've got 2 as default, and then finally set it back to 1 again. When we're moving between the tabs, we can see that the URL is reflecting the tab we're on. If I don't want that, I can add the no link attribute on the viewport, and it will no longer show the components loaded within this viewport. And if we look at the title, we can do the same thing there. Adding no title will remove it from the page title as well. Next up, history. If I'm stepping between the components, we can see that by going back and forth, it remembers all the tabs I've been to. We can change this as well by adding the no history to the viewport. Now the viewport navigations within the viewport is not added to the browser history. Let's take it back and make sure that it's back. Next up, we're going to turn the component called to from an HTML only component into a fully fledged custom element component with a view and a view model. We start by adding the TypeScript file, also named to, and define the class in it. Now we're going to define the parameters that can be used when you're routing to the to component. We do that by adding the static property parameters to the class. In this case, I'm going to call it ID. We also add a load method, which will receive the values that we passed into it. We add an instance variable ID to the component and then set it in the load method. Now we can go into the template and just add ID received. And pass in the parameters ABC and try it out. We can see nothing happens. The reason for this is that we're importing the HTML component. We need to let Aurelia know that we're now using both HTML and TS and remove the suffix. And there you go. We can also customize the title a bit by adding a static property called title into the view component. This can be a string, or in this case, a method that gets the view model passed into it. Using this, we can set what title we want the component to show. Again, with a string with its string interpolation. And there you have it.